From pollinators to regionally adapted seeds, we learn how innovators are preparing Colorado for a shifting agricultural landscape. We'll chat with an expert from Colorado's honey industry, a farmer growing regionally adapted seeds, an organization helping farmers thrive, and a local chef. They'll help us understand what the increasingly extreme weather patterns mean for the future of agriculture here in Colorado, and how the hospitality industry is using its platform to educate diners. We'll have 4 people here today, starting with Philip Taylor of Mad Agriculture, Beth Conrey of B Squared Apiaries, Alex Zeidner of Folks Farm and Seed, and Daniel Asher, executive chef of Ashkara and River in Woods.
Yeah, so I'm Phil Taylor, co-founder of Mad Agriculture. Mad Agriculture is inspired by Mary Berry, who's sitting right back there, her dad, Wendell. The Mad Farmer poems are these set of poems that Wendell wrote, I think in the 70s, that call humanity to this radical reimagination of society based on love, reciprocity, ecological values, place-based wisdom, and those virtues certainly animate my life and animate the work of Mad Agriculture. And so over the last 4.5 years, after kind of a lifetime in academia as a soil scientist and tropical biogeochemist, I kind of pulled the plug on the over service of the cerebral realm and wanted to get back into kind of the nitty-gritty and the guts of creating cultural change on the ground. And so we've been developing kind of a set of services that help farmers transition and thrive in regenerative and organic ag. The very heart of it is kind of community building. For me, regenerative ag is really, it's a revolution that needs to subvert the industrial economy. And so in any revolution, you have to think about how revolutions are made, which is it has to be irresistible, it has to be delicious, it has to be born of place. And so that kind of heart of the community is where we start. And maybe later on the panel I can get into the other things we do.
Hello, thanks for Edible for hosting this. I'm Alex Zeidner. I own Folks Farm and Seed. We're a small organic farm up in Fort Collins, Colorado. We cultivate about 4 acres of vegetables, mainly vegetable crops, and seed crops. So our main focus, along with soil health, is regionally adapting crops to our climate. And we do that through very intentional selection processes and picking the best crops that are going to grow in our area. So like I brought this squash with me on a last minute whim as a bit of a safety blanket up here. This is an old friend of mine. This is the Stella Blue Kabocha squash, and this is a really unique squash in that people have been stewarding this for thousands of years. Like our food, anything that we're eating now is coming from up to 10,000 years of human and plant coevolution. And what that has made is like all this crop diversity, but sadly in the last 100 years or so, that crop diversity has been lost to uniform yields and hybridization and GMO seeds. So we've lost 75% of our crop diversity since then, but there's still these vestiges and living organisms of ancient seeds around. And so this particular squash is a cross between a New Mexican variety of the Stella Blue Kabocha and another from Boulder County, Colorado, where they've been stewarding it for about 20 years. So we're bringing in genetics from hotter, more extreme climates, crossbreeding them with genetics from our climate to create crops that are living in real time with our climate. So if we're undergoing drought stress, if we're undergoing hailstorms, different pest pressures, these are taking real life, real time adaptation of those and learning how to deal with those. And in that, we're building a more resilient form of agriculture that is also delicious. This is one of the tastiest little squashes you'll ever have. And making it accessible to people where you could take the seeds out of this and grow it in your own garden as well. So that's the quick of what I do. And yeah.
Hi. Whoa, like the last guy. I'm a little louder than I thought I was. So, yeah, I own B Squared Apiaries. We run about 150 colonies from the roof of the Denver Botanic Gardens down here up to Silver Reef Organic Farm in Wellington. including on Alex's folks farm in Fort Collins. I did not start out beekeeping. Most people who keep bees come from beekeeping families. And I was always a buggy as a kid. People would call me batty probably now, but I'm still buggy. And I just love bees. So we ended up making a business out of it, making a career out of it. And we have some spectacular honeys. We do produce both varietal honeys as well as infused honey. So that's kind of an odd thing for a beekeeper to do, is mess with their honey. But we've had pretty great success with messing with it, and we like it. And so that's what we're doing right now. Okay.
Thank you, Beth. And last but not least, just in order of where they're sitting, is Daniel Asher.
Thanks. Great to see you, by the way. And Beth is being super low-key. Her honey is like transformative and deeply magical. So you all should know that. I'm Daniel. I've been cooking in professional kitchens since I was 14 years old. It's everything I've ever done. It's a complete and total immersion in service to strangers, which is something that has brought me a tremendous level of joy over 3 decades now. I have a restaurant group. I'm the chef and partner of a restaurant group based in Boulder, and everything we do is rooted in a very high level of intention for soil and humans and animals and energy in general. Sometimes we do better than other directions, depending on what the equation looks like. I think dealing with what everyone has been through over the last few years, the landscape has shifted dramatically in a way I've really never seen before or never imagined unfolding. And we are constantly reassessing how we can be better. I am constantly looking to see how we can make deeper, more profound, more meaningful connections around a table. I look at food as being one of the most powerful mediums for change and for connection. I think food, when you break bread together and you share a meal, everything else slips away, whether it's religious ideals, political philosophies, wealth level, poverty level, access, all of that is stripped away as we share a meal together, and that creates a very vulnerable opportunity for dialogue and for learning. So I look at restaurants as being a very powerful opportunity to create very deep and intentional human connections that hopefully extend beyond the duration of dinner.
Thank you so much. And so we're going to be talking about climate change, and particularly in Colorado, and how it's affected your businesses and how you're adapting to the change. And I think we've all noticed, just as residents of Colorado, the changing weather, the severity, the lack of predictability, which I guess if you're not from Colorado, is always unpredictable. But within certain areas, it's gotten even more so. And specifically in areas where agriculture is predominant. And so thankfully, my living doesn't depend on having to deal with that, but for these folks, it does. So we're going to start out with a few questions as soon as I can get to them in my notes. So the first question is going to be, in your line of work, what's changing as a result of climate change? And you can go in any order. You can, in your line of work, what's changing as a result of climate change? And since you're holding the mic and the squash, we'll let you go first.
Speaking squash.
There we go. Yeah, I deal with climate on a very visceral level every day. We spend hours upon hours outside, our feet on the ground, our hands in the dirt, working under the sun in all kinds of conditions. For example, this time last year, we had experienced a frost already. 2 years ago, it had snowed by the beginning of September. So as a farmer, I'm looking for varieties and crops that are going to sustain and grow my business. So I'm constantly selecting for early adapting crops that are going to bring in that harvest as soon as it can, from seed to harvest, limit those days. I'm looking for things that are going to deal with pests better. We run into a lot of issues where certain plants attract bugs for whatever reason, and so we're culling those out. And we're doing this through diversity. We're doing this through mixing genetics and bringing in a lot of plant species and selecting from those the best, the outliers, the performers, the ones that are the most productive, the most tasty, the most beautiful, and working with local chefs especially to kind of formulate those varieties to work well and just make my life and the life of like anyone that works with plants easier, and just make those crops hardy and vigorous and grow fast and be strong and not demand over attention.
Thank you. And in terms of the squash that you've brought with us, can you tell us just a little bit about the flavor profile and maybe what makes it unique, that makes it something that's good to grow right now?
Yeah, it's a kabocha squash, so it's a bit of a sweeter squash, but you can take it either way. It makes an incredible soup, as well as traditionally like slice it and fry it like a tempura style. So it's just a very versatile, and this thing will live unrefrigerated on your counter for up to 6 months. So it's a storage food. It's a staple crop, as they say. This is a deep winter vegetable. It doesn't require refrigeration or anything like that. So, and it just gets better with age, honestly.
And I think, Beth, you would be a good person to follow up next, since you mentioned that you have beehives on the farm up in Fort Collins?
Correct. And so actually we were talking before the panel on, what's going on with the bees. I mean, everybody's always asking me, what's going on with the bees? What's going on with the bees? And I have it down to the 5 Ps, which I should make it bees, shouldn't I? The 5 Ps of bees. But the 5 Ps of bees we call, the first one is poor forage. And basically, and that's a stretch on a P, but nonetheless it is. And poor forage, and all it is there's not enough plants anymore, okay? We have built cities, we have built roads, we have edge-to-edge monoculture with no hedgerows on the edges, no ditch rows. We have nothing for insects to live on. And bees, in particular, need nectar and pollen, which are only provided through plants, and plants that bloom. And so that's the first one. The second one is pesticides. Because we have so outbalanced our world, we have a lot of pest pressures out there that are requiring greater and greater levels of greater and more different pesticides, and those are a problem, particularly seed coatings and neonicotinoids, and how they are adversely impacting bee behavior at very, very low levels. And in particular, we're seeing massive problems with queens and queens success rates. The third thing is pests. And everybody always hears about this thing called a varroa mite. Its scientific name is Varroa destructor. And if that doesn't give you an idea of how vicious of a pest this is, it is bad. And it's an exoparasitic mite, so it affixes to the body of the bee, and it lives on the fat bodies of the bee, which you would think would be a good thing if you're watching your weight, but it's not. And fat bodies are how bees survive winters without any food coming in. They have to live on their fat reserves. And this is what this insect is attacking. So if you have a bee that's got a lousy diet first, then a contaminated diet on top of it, and then it has this bug that attacks its exoskeleton and creates this giant hole through which all these pathogens start coming. So now you have bacteria and viruses and things that can all live inside this insect. And finally, we have politics, because we know that all of these things are playing a role. So if all of the mites disappeared tomorrow, would we have healthy bees? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If we banned neonicotinoids tomorrow, would we have healthy bees? No, we would not, because they don't have healthy food, and they don't have adequate food. And so they're the exact same as us. We've got to go back to the very basics and get food back for bugs.
And just to follow up on that, how have these different factors influenced your honey production, or the bees' honey production, which you bring to us?
Right. So honey production, you know, bees are just a humming little division of agriculture, and we are subject to the same weather elements that the rest of agriculture is. So last year we had a stunning production year, probably the best year we've seen in the area for decades. And then this year, when did we get rain? Everybody know the day? What was the date in Boulder? What was the date in Fort Collins? And we didn't have any rain for months on end. And we had no honey production. Okay, so like all we're doing is inputs, and we're not getting any outputs. And then, by golly, in August we started raining, and we rained a bunch, and plants responded immediately by blooming and putting out a ton of nectar, and bees responded to nectar and pollinated those plants, carried it all back home, and we had a blockbuster August and September. So we just, the bottom line is, it's like everything else, we don't know anymore. We just do the best we can and take it when we got it.
Daniel, as someone who relies on the products of our other panelists to make better food for all of us, how has the climate affected your ability to select products, your ability to be a good chef, your ability to work with people in agriculture?
Sure. I think, coming in from the restaurant side, we're at the tail end of a very long, magnificent equation that we just try to give the proper level of reverence to. We deal with the impact of a hailstorm that you dealt with at 4 in the morning, and I'm on the phone with a farmer a few hours later finding out how's that going to affect what our plan was with our menu for the next month or so. So what happens in the fields, what happens in the soil deeply impacts the restaurant equation. And we already deal with, everyone on the panel, very tiny margins when you look at the level of just plain effort and hard work that goes into growing vegetables or honey. Or agriculture in general in our communities. By the time it gets to the restaurant, we're doing everything we can to make sense of an already very deeply nonsensical equation. So climate change affects us in the restaurant space, not just through the food that we prepare and cook, but the attitudes and feelings of our staff and our guests. Climate change and the effects that people are now seeing more dramatically than before is creating a very high level of concern and fear, as it damn well should. So our duty is to create a safe and hopefully sacred space where people can gather and feel loved and nourished. But the impact that we've seen specifically, in the last 2 years has been crazy. And the pricing model has been flipped completely upside down. Everything is up, grains, dairy, animal protein, vegetable protein, everything is up, 11 to 43% year over year. And that's dealing with, a profit margin model that hopefully is somewhere around 5% if you're doing everything very, very well. So that, is a challenge that's perpetual, continues to become more and more difficult. And I think climate change, along with many other factors, are creating a global mindset now that requires us to be not just stewards of land, but stewards of each other. Because people are getting really freaked out, and there's a lot of things that are going in very weird directions. So how climate change affects our restaurants is it pushes us to be more thoughtful about the decisions that we make, and it pushes us to be stronger and more resilient within ourselves so that we can nourish and love others.
Thanks. And Philip, at Mad Agriculture, I guess you're involved in helping farmers make decisions and transition to better ways of agriculture and farming. So maybe you can talk about that in terms of climate change and how it affects your ability to communicate with farmers.
Yeah, totally. We work with farmers in about 22 states. And so there's a variety of sort of frontline issues with climate change, whether it's lack of water or increasing heat or just sort of erratic weather patterns and sort of new norms on numbers of hot days or water in a given hour or whatever it might be. And so we often begin that conversation with kind of the high level conversation of what does the land want to be and what does the land need us to be? And inevitably that leads us down a journey of thinking that leads to biodiversity and perenniality as the ultimate ways to build climate resilience. And so, for instance, in our work in Montana, where these farmers who have been growing wheat and lentils and garbanzo beans for the last few decades, the answer inevitably becomes, how do we move to a livestock-based system that's oriented around grass? And so, for a farmer who has combines and grain bins, like how do you go about that level of transformation? And what banker is going to finance that, and what markets are going to support that kind of transition? And so at Mad Ag, we've developed kind of 3 core ways we help farmers. We have this kind of land and business planning team that helps on the guts of that design, moving from vision to action. And then we actually developed an entire alternative bank for farmers that can finance that transition. And then we also line up all the markets so they can sell it. And so, the Manuels, for instance, who have 12,000 acres in Montana, they're in the midst of replanting all of their annual fields into grassland. We financed all of it, and we helped them buy, hundreds of head of cattle to move into a more holistically managed grazing system. And so that's one example of how we're working in a place that used to get 15 inches of rain, now it gets 7, and so they're on this knife edge of being able to grow crops in any capacity. And so having a holistic approach to sort of full system change is kind of what we're all about. And of course, it's not all just Mad Ag. It's, there's probably 15 other partners kind of involved in that project. And so it's, again, back to community and sort of reconnecting the dots between all the good stuff that's already happening, but just really getting the synergy out of all of it. So that's one vignette.
Thank you. So the next question is going to be pretty high level, but I'll try and focus it on your specific role in Colorado food, and that is what can we do to slow these changes or even reverse them? And so I'm thinking in terms of, are you involved with legislators, education, I guess even with your own employees, like you said, Daniel, it affects everybody that works in your restaurants as well. So, so if you think about it in terms of what you're doing personally and as a business, that'd be great. And since you've got the mic, you want to go ahead, Philip?
Sure. Yeah. As to paraphrase Wendell Berry, how we eat determines how the world is used. And so the most important thing you could possibly do is reshape how you eat. And so day to day, I mean, my family, my wife and 4 kids, and everyone in the Mad Ag team, and we live those virtues and values. And it's delicious, it's fun. It can be expensive, so there's definitely a food access and equality, equity thing that I think needs to be tangled and wrestled with. Our work is just working with the stewards of the earth. For me, a farmer is much more than just someone that grows food. It's someone that has the privilege to care for the wild spaces and the cultivated spaces of the land. And so for me, farmers are that nexus point between planetary well-being and human well-being. And so all of our work at Mad Ag is focused on that grassroots change where really the rubber hits the road, right at the level of the soil and the ecosystem. And, we certainly do things in politics and policy, but those are all sort of tier 2, tier 3 things for us.
We focus every day on building buffers and listening to our land, kind of what Phil was saying. We want to hear what that land wants, and what it really wants is to be covered. It wants to grow, it wants to be photosynthesizing. And so we're looking at what can our region and our farm in particular do to not only sustain but to heal that land and start to heal that space. And so it's really come for us. Cover crops have been a huge thing in keeping our fields covered for 12 months out of the year with growing plants, rather than a traditional corn farmer, you're looking at 80 to 100 days of photosynthesis. So we're really focused on guiding that carbon and photosynthesizing that sunlight from the atmosphere and storing it in our soil and building our fertility that way. And then we tier that up with our plants and letting plants go to flower. We're letting things be available for bees and pollination and letting it be a little more wild and not trying to totally control our pests or our herbicides, all that stuff. We've sort of let it become its own ecosystem, and because of that, we don't have nearly the pest issues that we used to have. We went through times of a lot of aphid pressure, and now I can't go anywhere without finding a ladybug. So really for us, it's come down to stepping back and listening to what our region wants and how can we listen? How can we be active participants and learners of our ecosystem and of our planet? So finding farmers that are doing things like that is a great way to be involved. And for me, it's a daily practice of not having a plan necessarily when I walk out into the field, and rather just being there and seeing what comes up. Where does our energy need to go right here, right now?
I don't have that privilege of being a landowner with respect to my aspect of agriculture. We have to rely on other people's land. So B Squared does things a little bit differently. And I run through both the political side of it as well as the nonprofit side of it. So here in Colorado, I have a nonprofit called People and Pollinators Action Network that works exclusively on forage and pesticide issues here in Colorado. I sit on the board of the Pollinator Stewardship Council, which is a national organization that focuses really only on pesticide issues. But then I've also kind of come into some of these certifications that I think have value to my business and how I run it. So we are 1% for the Planet members. We have our B Corp application in, which has been in for over a year. Maybe we'll see something on it. But B Corp is a really interesting, a very difficult program to get certified with, but it means something to be a B Corp company, and it stands for Benefit Corporation, and it's where you are running your business for the general good instead of for shareholder return, and then we also pack in plastic, and that's kind of been problematic for me because I'm not really a pro-plastic person. And we were able to find a really cool program that does a plastic offset for us, like a carbon credit. It's a plastic credit. So we tally up all our plastic usage for the quarter and then pay them a fee to be plastic neutral, and they operate in third world countries, which is where the plastic recycling problem is, or the plastic disposal problem really is at the forefront, getting programs put together to get plastic out of those environments. So we can't manage the land, but we can manage how we spend our money and what we do with the money that we earn to try and do some of the things that are better for us. And I think that that as a consumer, you should support the people that are doing those things. And you should ask the people if they are doing those things, because there's plenty that aren't. And if we want to encourage that behavior, the best way to do it is with money. And so if you have two people next to each other and one's doing what you want them to do and one's not, if this one costs more, you better put a little money towards it to get this one to do those things, because we need more people doing those things. And then, of course, buy what you eat and eat what you buy, and plant flowers and don't spray them.
Well said. Personally, I feel like I live in a constant state of advocacy. Had the privilege and the opportunity to go to Washington to help move forward the 2018 Farm Bill. I'm involved with the Environmental Working Group, the Harvard Food Policy Law Clinic. The James Beard Foundation, Chefs Action Network has some great, amazing initiatives and programming to create an opportunity for chefs, cooks, food service professionals, anyone in the restaurant industry to have a platform to speak and engage and feel like you're doing something that matters above and beyond tableside conversations with guests, which I have relentlessly and constantly. But having an engaging conversation about how lamb is raised for 15 minutes, with 6 people having dinner, I've realized is not as impactful as I'd like to think it can be. So that's why we've adopted a phenomenal program called Zero Foodprint, which is deeply tied into Phil and his work with Mad Ag. Mad Ag works as the kind of nucleus of funds. The way it works, it was a pilot program started by Anthony Mint in California with a great group of restaurants and farms and ranches, all focused on regenerative agriculture principles, being able to push funding towards farms that are trying to do better, whether it's composting, cover crops, silvopasture, rotational grazing, holistic land management, any of these components that are deeply meaningful and have been proven to make a huge impact on sequestering carbon. And you basically have a fee of 1% that's added to every guest's check. You can opt out of it, but we've had maybe one person out of thousands say, I don't want to be a part of this, which is totally fine. But basically 1% of all sales go towards the Zero Foodprint initiative, and then that's distributed in Colorado. It's a partnership with Boulder, Denver, Restore Colorado. $200,000 so far, spread across 11 member farms. Is that right, Phil? Which is pretty fantastic. So to be able to have that almost in an automated format, that regardless of if someone's paying attention and they know what that's about, that's great. If someone's not paying attention, they're notified that that's part of the bill, and they're just like, oh, that's an extra 78 cents, whatever. And it doesn't matter at that moment, but it does matter deeply, because as we all know, it really comes down to available funds in order to initiate some form of change and impact in the right direction. So Zero Foodprint for me personally has been a phenomenal way to multiply my impact to a couple tables a night at one restaurant and spread it across hundreds of guests over the course of we've been involved for I think almost 11 months now, and it's been absolutely fantastic to raise that awareness and be a part of that. And as far as personally, we grow as much food as we can. My wife is amazing with having gardens. We live up in the mountains fairly remotely, and it's just a pollinator paradise. I mean, there's just endless. It's like a just ecosystem that we wake up into every day, which is such a blessing of birds and animals and deer and squirrels and hummingbirds. And it's just a amazing reminder every day of how important it is to live in harmony and in response to the natural world, as opposed to live in this mentality of extraction and depletion and what can I take so that I feel whole, and inevitably someone else suffers, and that someone is Mother Earth.
Thank you. So one final question. We've got about 8 minutes before we take questions from all of you. Can you tell us some ways that through your business you're helping educate consumers about climate change and what they can do as consumers, what are some ways of dealing with these changes that are going to affect us personally and economically?
I'm in obsessive constant dialogue with consumers about connecting to the source of your food. I think for so long, one of the many things that got us into our current mess is a complete detachment from where food actually comes from. Is this package of ground protein from an actual animal? What was their quality of life like? Like, there's been a complete brainwashing detachment of what's actually in a package when you purchase it or when you go to a restaurant and dine out. So for me, it's a constant education of our staff and our guests, and planting little seeds of knowledge and data and awareness so that there's manifestation of awareness that our food and where it comes from is one of the last things we actually have control over as individual citizens, that we can actually make decisions about, that is deeply intimate. We're literally taking something and putting it into our bodies. That's one of the most intimate acts you can do, and food is one of those components. So to have a constant awareness of connecting with who's your farmer, who's your rancher, who's your miller, who's your baker, who runs your local apiary, who's in charge of land stewardship, what gets you out of bed in the morning to go deal with your fields and your folks, literally. Those are the dialogues that I hope people are having, whether it's after the restaurants close or during operating hours. But it really comes down to knowing what questions to ask and knowing what knowledge to seek, and having the data be accessible and delicious, which is a very important word that's come up a few times. I can talk endlessly about where a specific dish came from, and 11 different farms were involved in 2 different kinds of heirloom flour and Beth's amazing honey. But at the end of the day, if it's not delicious and craveable, it doesn't really matter, because that person's not coming back to have that again, and they're not telling anyone about it. So flavor inevitably leads the way. I think deliciousness is a phenomenal medium for transformation, and I try to live in a place where I want things to be delicious and memorable. And when people ask, why is this so good? It has very little to do with me or my culinary team. We're just seasoning things and throwing things in hot pans. It has everything to do with the hands and dreams and wisdom that went into growing and crafting and creating the things that we are cooking.
We're really lucky that better food tastes better.
Yes, right? Isn't that amazing?
It's really cool how as your soil improves, the food's better.
And you feel better.
And it's we made some pickles last year. We had a bumper crop of cucumbers, and this guy came, bought some tomatoes from me, texted me 2 hours later being like, dude, I had to go for a jog after I ate those pickles. They were so good. There's more energy in them. And so that's where we get our customers too. You know, we do weekly farmers markets. We have 100 members in our CSA. We distribute to local restaurants. We even distribute to the local food bank in Fort Collins. And where it starts is people are like, wow, that just tastes, like, why is your lettuce so good? It's like, well, we try. We try hard to make it the best that we can make it, and we try hard to make it in a way that's in relationships that are so much bigger than ours. We try to make it in a way that, like, our earth wants it to be. And so that's, I mean, it's endless conversations, but it starts at flavor and it starts at taste. And then you have them, then you get them. It's like, why is this lettuce still good in my fridge 2 weeks later? It's like, well, because we picked it hours before you ate it, because that's what we do, and that's what you deserve as a customer. That's what every human on this earth deserves, is healthy food, and they deserve it 3 times, 4 times, as many times a day as they want it. And we try to just make our food accessible to everyone to enjoy.
We do a bunch of different things. I think I would echo what you guys said. It's got to be irresistible. It's got to be delicious. It's got to be fun. And it has to offer people belonging. You know, I think that belonging is kind of the linchpin of, you know, why people grip into things. Like, if you love something, you fight for it. If you love something, you care for it. And, you know, really anchoring our communication, our messaging in hope, in love, is absolutely key for us. And we have this biannual journal that we publish with a bunch of folks that bring their voice, and we're trying to use Mad Ag as kind of a platform for different voices and ideas of the revolution, I think. And, you know, we also have fun. We make trucker hats. Daniel wears that trucker hat all the time. It's got a bison on it. And we make these animal hats that are really just reflective of the animals that have been hurt by the food system. And so that in telling their stories, they have a place in our sort of social consciousness, so that when we eat, when we decide to make decisions around conservation, these animals are alive in our consciousness. Monkfish, anchovy, beaver, wolf. And, you know, I was in Boulder walking up the hill the other day, and there's like 2 high schoolers coming down the hill, and I'm like, hey, sick hats. And they're like, yeah, these things are awesome. Like, not knowing that I had designed them. But, you know, it was just super fun. And I also gave out like a ton of stickers to a bunch of high schoolers on Pearl Street, and I said, just get guerrilla with these things, put them everywhere. And I got a call from the vice principal of Boulder High, and they're like, what is mad agriculture? They had been like stamped over all of the lockers, you know. And so I think just kind of getting radical and having fun and doing sort of those kind of fun things, it just enlivens the movement and gives us stories, it gives us memories, it gives us shared experience. And when you have those things, it's easier to sort of grow and feed that virtuous cycle of community and humanity. And so that's how we approach it.
Well, I think I kind of answered most of it on my last little round, but I will say that one of the things that I found from the pandemic is sort of a return to tangible. You know, I'm involved, all of us, every day have something at the end of the day that we can hold on to that we created. And most people don't have that. They think all day about things and numbers and planetaries, whatevers, you know, but at the end of the day, to have a squash, to have a jar of honey is incredibly valuable. And the faster we get back to it, the better we'll be.
Thank you. So yeah, now we're going to open it up to questions from all of you, and there's mics there on either side if someone wants to get us started.
What do you see when you look at the bigger system shift that we need to be making happen right now in terms of plastic and agriculture?
Well, for us, we'd love to see a packaging option out of a plant-based material that is clear. Okay, honey needs to be in a plastic or a glass, something that you can see the color of honey in. And there is some motion being made on that, but it's all material that looks like a Yeti cooler kind of thing, okay? And we can't have that for our product. That won't merchandise our product. And so at the end of the day, we got to sell honey. And so how do we sell honey? It's in glass or it's in plastic. If we could find some way to sell it that wasn't in plastic, I'd love to see you guys get me something, whoever can do that, but it's not me.
Same, produce bags need to be clear. People need to see the products inside of them. And I think organic agriculture especially uses a lot of plastic. Plastic mulch and drip tape irrigation is just the industry standard at this point. So finding cost-effective alternatives to that are super important. And I think that comes down to a lot of education and more funded knowledge around crimping cover crops and creating mulches and soils to protect crops from weeds. So that's a big one for us.
Restaurants real quick. Packaging in restaurants is horribly destructive and awful. It makes me ill personally all the time. It's hard to, there's cane fiber containers, they have liners, you need that inserted, otherwise whatever's packed in there will leak and get soggy. Then people call and they're upset that they got home and their sauce, is all over the bag. There's some great, there's a local program called Repeater. I think they now shifted it. I forgot the name of the new company that they joined forces with, but Zero Footprint is one of the recipients. But we use it at Ushgar and Boulder and River and Woods, and it's all glass and stainless steel. And it's phenomenal because people get their food in those containers, and then they have a little QR code that gets scanned so the container can be traced. And then they're brought back to a main facility and sanitized and then delivered back to the restaurants for packaging. It has not had the saturation rate that I would have liked to see when I first heard about it, and we got the containers in and I was super excited. And then they just sat there for weeks while 2 people placed to-go orders that were in those packages. So that was disappointing, but I think that has to do with word of mouth and marketing and change in behavior, which is very difficult for consumers once you're established in a habit. But things like that I think are groundbreaking and deeply necessary. The whole single-use cycle that we're in as human beings is totally repulsive and insane.
I wanted to ask you guys, I've seen in my own life and in organizations that I've been in, the character building that comes out of difficult situations that you guys have all faced. If you could talk about a difficult situation that you've had, maybe in your organization or personally, and how it's really helped, craft who you become and how you care about food.
Yeah, I would say that life is full of light and dark cycles, and I've been purpose-filled my entire life, and about 6 years ago I went through a massive trench of depression, and the first sort of hiccup in mental health and questioning and having all of this energy but not knowing where to go with it. And I kind of pulled the plug on academia. I had failed in 2 other startups, spent all of my money. I had 3 kids at the time. My wife was a saint, and I felt like I was just sinking into an abyss. And John O'Donohue, an Irish poet who passed away probably 8-9 years ago, there's a poem called For a New Beginning, which it was my tether, and so staying true to that, going back to my moorings. That's when I went back to Wendell Berry and Terry Tempest William and Mary Oliver, and went back home to those truths, the thing I knew to be true, and from that kind of rebuilt, Mad Ag with my wife. And so coming back home to those basic essentials and nourishing yourself in that, I think is, for me, what was critical to figuring out how to manifest all the vision and virtue that wanted to come out of me but didn't know how to do it.
Mental health is a real struggle in agriculture. It's one of the highest rates of suicide in profession across the world. And for me, it's manifested in not moving slow enough. We get really excited and wrapped up, climate change, it's ruining the world now. Do everything you can now, and it's almost numbing. And so in our first year, we tended an acre. By 3 years, we had 4 farms and 5 acres, and that tore me up and spit me out. And I have been in a process of going for quality over quantity, and recognizing that slow, conscious steps steadily in a direction that's improving is the way to go. It's slow, gradual change over the course of a lifetime. And how do we make this a career path for young people to get into where they can have longevity in these things where you're working with physical items, you're dealing with so much different pressure that's like very real and tangible in the world. So it's how do we slowly and steadily make those changes that are going to continue to build and help us prosper, but not to go whole hog and not try to, eat the whole cake in one bite, but sit at the table and be present. So.
I go hang with the bees.
That was good.
That's it.
Short and sweet, pun intended. It's a great question. I appreciate you bringing that up. I think for me, my self-sustaining well has always come from living inside of a bustling restaurant and kitchen ecosystem. And COVID completely shattered that to the ground and beyond. I get a lot of my personal wellness and nourishment from literally physically connecting with people, hugging people, having these amazing conversations, reading faces, being able to tell when someone's enthusiastic and craving more, or when they're like, this is too much, thank you so much, the potatoes were delicious, bye. Because I tend to go off on pretty intensive tangents about food. And that all was completely stripped away for so many people. Luckily I have an amazing family, 5 incredible kids, and a remarkable wife who saw what was happening, and I had to shift to a new model for myself, as opposed to living in this place where I'm trying to balance family and restaurant. I suddenly realized, I just need to absorb all this energy from my kids and really dive into that. And it helped me set up a new realization that I don't need to be dependent on external things at the restaurants to feel like I'm feeling full and satisfied with connections, but the most profound connections I can make and need to make are right next to me. And that was a pretty powerful thing that, as COVID has shifted, it's not really in the news cycle anymore, but it still deeply is profoundly affecting millions of people. As things have come back to some sense of normal, that has stuck with me and reframed a completely new perspective on my work.
Thanks,
guys.
Okay. One more question. Hi, I just want to say that with this conversation, it's the first time today the word politics was brought up. And also that we almost got close to saying the word capitalism, which I think is so much part of all this. And I have one quick question. Beth, you said there were 5 Ps. I only heard 4. What were they?
There was 5.
I know, but what were they? Would you list them again?
Poor forage,
Right.
pesticides, pest, pathogens, politics. Yeah, I knew pathogens were kind of like in viruses and stuff, but yeah.
I do want to say, when we were having our pre-meeting a few weeks ago about this panel, Beth said something pretty profound that I wrote down.
You need to write this stuff down. It doesn't happen very often.
She just said, we are an invasive species. And I think that's a pretty powerful thing to contemplate, right? As humans, as we navigate our path, what have we done, right? Are we doing things that are impacting that concept in a way that is shifting it in a smarter and more beautiful direction, or are we continuing in a cycle that makes us more and more of an invasive species? I think that was very important that you brought that up.
Thanks, everybody. That was really awesome. Great way to end the day. Thanks.